The rain had been relentless for days. It wasn't the soothing kind that drummed softly against windows or sent people curling up with books by the fire. No, this rain was oppressive. A deafening roar that never ceased, a suffocating downpour that turned the air cold and heavy. Jake sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, the pale glow of a single lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The city outside was submerged under endless sheets of rain, the streets transformed into rivers. Most of the residents in his building had evacuated days ago when the weather turned strange, but Jake had nowhere to go, no family to run to. So he stayed, enduring the storm. But tonight, the rain sounded different. It wasn't just the hammering against the windows or the gurgling drains below. It was something else. A subtle rhythm. A pattern, like footsteps. Jake froze, his spoon suspended over a half-eaten bowl of soup. The sound was faint, but distinct. A wet slapping noise echoing down the empty hall outside his apartment. At first, he thought it might be one of the few neighbors who had stayed behind. But as the noise grew louder, closer, he realized something was off. The steps didn't sound human. They were irregular, dragging, as if someone, or something, was limping through the flooded corridors. The power flickered. Jake's heart raced as he stood, moving cautiously toward the door. Pressing his ear against the wood, he strained to listen. The footsteps had stopped. But now there was a different sound. A soft, watery squelching, like something wet pressing against the walls. "Hello?" Jake called, his voice trembling. Silence. He waited a moment longer, then slowly unlocked the door and opened it just a crack. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by the faint green glow of an emergency exit sign at the far end. The air smelled damp and metallic, like rust and decay. "Is someone there?" He called again, louder this time. A low, guttural sound answered him, almost like a growl, but wetter, gurgling as if it came from deep underwater. Jake slammed the door shut, his hands shaking. The sound grew louder, more insistent, as if whatever was in the hallway was now right outside his door. He backed away, his eyes darting to the windows. The rain was still pouring, the glass streaked and fogged, but something caught his eye. A figure stood across the street, barely visible through the storm. It wasn't moving, just standing there, staring up at his window. Jake squinted, trying to make out details, but the rain distorted everything. All he could see was that the figure was unnaturally tall and impossibly thin, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. And then it raised a hand. Jake stumbled back, his pulse pounding in his ears. He reached for his phone, desperate to call someone, anyone, but there was no signal. The rain had knocked out the cell towers days ago. The sound outside his door stopped. For a brief moment, the silence was worse than the noise. Jake held his breath, straining to hear anything. Then slowly, the doorknob began to turn. He grabbed the nearest thing he could find, heavy metal, candlestick, and braced himself. The door creaked open, inch by inch, revealing the dark hallway beyond. It was empty. Jake's breath came in shallow gasps as he stepped forward, his makeshift weapon raised. The floor was wet, water pooling around his bare feet. He looked down and froze. Footprints. They weren't normal footprints. They were long, webbed, with claw-like impressions at the tips. The tracks led down the hallway toward the stairwell. He should have stayed inside. He should have locked the door and waited for the storm to pass. But something, curiosity, fear, or sheer stupidity, propelled him forward. The stairwell was even darker than the hallway, the faint emergency lights flickering ominously. The wet footprints continued downward, disappearing into the blackness below. Jake hesitated at the top of the stairs, peering into the void. "Who's there?" he called, his voice echoing. A noise answered him, soft at first, but growing louder. It sounded like crying, a child's cry. "Help me!" a small voice whimpered. Jake's stomach twisted. He hated the thought of a child being trapped in the building, alone and scared. He descended the stairs cautiously, the sound of his own breathing loud in his ears. The crying grew louder as he reached the basement level. The door to the boiler room was ajar, water seeping out from the gap. He pushed it open. The room was flooded, the water rising almost to his knees. Pipes dripped from the ceiling, adding to the already overwhelming noise of the rain. In the center of the room stood a small figure facing away from him. "Hey, are you okay?" Jake called, stepping closer. The figure didn't move. "Come on, it's not safe down here. Let's get you..." The figure turned. It wasn't a child. Its face was featureless, a smooth, pale surface where eyes, a nose, and a mouth should have been. Its head tilted, mimicking the gesture Jake had seen from the figure outside his window. Jake stumbled back, nearly slipping in the water. The creature began to move toward him, its steps slow and deliberate, the water rippling around it unnaturally. He turned and ran. The stairwell seemed endless as he climbed, his legs burning and lungs aching. The sound of wet footsteps followed him, growing louder with each step. When he reached his apartment, he slammed the door shut and bolted it. His chest heaved as he leaned against the door, listening. The footsteps stopped, but the rain didn't. Jake sank to the floor, clutching the candlestick tightly. He didn't know what that thing was or why it was here, but he knew one thing for certain: it wasn't alone. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and somewhere in the distance, another cry echoed through the storm. Jake knew it wasn't human.